I laughed for the first time. It felt unfamiliar. Delay. Then I realized the laughter didn't come. It came through me. The conference room had that particular sterile quality that all modern office space. Grey wall, white ceiling tile, with recessed LED light that hummed a frequent just below conch. The smell of recycled air and the faint chemical tablets of dry erase mark. Kevin from market was telling some story about his weekend camping trip gone. Something about a bear and a cooler, and the punchline hit exactly where it was. That's when it happened. I felt the impulse first, the recognition that something was funny. My brain processed the joke, identified the humor, sent the signal to my facial muscle to respond. But there was a gap, a half-second delay, like watching a video where the audio doesn't quite sync with the mood. And then the laughter came, rolling out of my throat in a sound I barely recognized as my own. It was my voice, yes, my lungs providing the air, my vocal cords producing the vibration. But the decision to laugh, the actual choice to express, felt like it had been made somewhere else and then transmitted to my body. Everyone turned. The laughter died, replaced by a silence that felt heavy and raw. Sarah from accounting smiled uncertain. Marcus, my best friend, and the only person in this building who really knew what the last 3 years had been like, raised his eyebrows in something between surprise and concern. Even Kevin stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly, as if he'd just witnessed something impossible. David, Dr. Monica Reed, our company's consulting neurologist, who happened to be sitting in on this, leaned forward. Are you all right? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to explain that I had just laughed at a joke, like a normal, that maybe this was progress, that perhaps the fog of the last 3 years was finally. But the words stuck in my throat because something was fundamentally wrong with what had just. The laughter hadn't felt like it. It hadn't felt like joy breaking through dark. It had felt like someone else had pressed a button and my body had simply obeyed. I'm fine, I heard myself say, and even that felt strange. Did I decide to say those words, or did they just? The meeting continued, but I couldn't. I kept replaying that moment, analyzing it with the same obsessive attention detail that made me good at my job of data. Stimulus received, processing, response initiate. But the timeline was wrong. In a normal emotional reaction, the feeling should precede, or at least coincide, with the expression. What I had experienced was the expression arriving before I had fully decided, like my body had laughed, and then informed my conscience about it after. 3 years ago, when Sarah died, something inside me, not gradually, not with the slow fade that everyone warned me. It was immediate. One moment I was a person who felt, who laughed and cried and got angry, fell in. The next moment I was empty, functional but empty. I went to work. I paid my bill. I existed, but I didn't feel. Therapists called it emotional numbing, a protective mechanism against trauma too overwhelming to process. I called it survival. And now, after 1,000 days of nothing, I had felt, or had I, because the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the emotion hadn't originated from within. It had come from somewhere else, used my body as a vehicle, and left me with the unsettling awareness that I was no longer the sole operator of my own. Marcus caught up with after, his hand on my shoulder, concern etched across his face. Hey man, that was, you laughed. That's progress. I wanted to agree. I wanted to believe that I was coming back myself. But as I opened my mouth to respond, I felt it again. That fractional delay between intention and action. Like my words were being routed through something else before they could emerge. Yeah, and the word felt borrowed, progress. But I knew, even then, that whatever had just begun It wasn't progress at all. It was something foul. It was the realization that the empty space I had created inside my to survive had become, and something had accepted. The symptoms started small, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining. 2 days after the incident in the conference, I was making coffee in my apartment kitchen when I felt sadness wash over me. Not the dull, familiar that had been a constant, but something sharp and immediate, like a knife sliding. My eyes began to water. Then, 3 seconds later, I remembered why I should. The coffee mug in my hand was her. The one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away, because I had given it to her on our first. But the tears had come before. The emotion had preceded. I stood there, frozen, watching drops fall into the coffee, and wondering if I had finally lost my mind. Grief was supposed to work in a specific order: trigger, memory, emotion, physical response. What I was experiencing was the sequence in reverse, as if someone was testing emotional reaction without bothering to provide proper context. Work became increasingly. I would find myself angry during morning, my jaw clenched and hands curled, only to realize minutes later that a colleague had made a comment that should have annoyed. The anger arrived, waiting for just during a presentation to client. I felt overwhelming fear grip, my heart racing and palms sweating. And only afterward did I notice that the clients looked displeased with our quarter. The fear knew before I'd. Marcus noted. Of course he did. We had been friends since, and he had been there through everything with Sam. He knew me better than any, which meant he could see the cracks forming in whatever facade trying. On Thursday, he cornered me in the parking garage, his face a mixed concern and something suspicion. "David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight." He glanced around the empty garage, his voice dropping lower. "Are you using pill or no?" The answer came too quickly defensive. "Nothing like that, because you're acting strange, not just the laugh. Your reactions are off. Yesterday in the meeting, you looked terrified before Jenkins even started talking the budget. How did you know?" I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. How could I tell him that my emotions were arriving before, that I was experiencing feelings that didn't belong, that every reaction felt like it was being processed through something first? "Instead," I said, "I'm just stressed, still adjusting." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly. "Okay, but if you need help, if something's going on, you know and tell me." Right. I wanted to believe that I wanted to trust that I could explain this nightmare to someone and have them understand. But as I looked at Marcus, at the genuine concern in his eye, I felt something. Suspicion. Not my suspicion of him, but suspicion flowing through me, directed at him, as if something inside me knew that Marcus couldn't. The feeling was so strong and so sudden that I took a step backward. "I'm fine," I said, and watched his expression shift from concern to something harder. "Really, I appreciate you checking." And I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand why I had suddenly felt suspicious. My best. There was no reason for it. Marcus had been nothing but supportive since Sarah. He had helped me move apartments when I couldn't bear to stay in a place shared. He had sat with me through countless silent when I couldn't find. He was the one person I should complete. So why did every instinct I had suddenly scream that he was hiding? And more terrifying were those instincts even. Dr. Monica Reeves called me into her office on Friday afternoon. Not the consulting room she used for company wellness, but her actual private office on the 3rd floor that most employees didn't even know existed. The space was smaller than I expected, lined with medical journals and framed degrees from Johns Hopkins. She gestured to a chair across from her desk, and I noticed her hand trembled slightly. "David, I need to talk to you about what happened at the conference." She pulled out a tablet. her fingers moving across. I've been reviewing the security, and I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you isn't meant to frighten. It's meant to help. She turned the tablet toward me. The video showed the conference room from an overhead angle. I could see myself sitting at the table, Kevin gesturing, animated as he told his story. Then the moment arrived. On screen, I watched my own face change, but it wasn't a natural progression of expression. My mouth opened first, curving into a smile before any other facial. Then my eyes crinkled at the corner, but the timing too slow, like watching a computer animation that hadn't been quite perfected. The laughter came last, and even through the silent security footage, I could see that something about the entire sequence looked mechanical, rehearsed, wrong. Did you notice? Monica asked softly. The delay between each component of the expression. I couldn't speak. Watching it from outside my own perspective made it That wasn't how human beings laugh. That was how something learned to imitate laughter by breaking it down into individual components and reassembling. I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest. Monica leaned forward, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine concern. Have you experienced any other unusual emotion response? Feelings that seem to arrive at the wrong time, or emotions that don't match this? I told her everything. The sadness before the memory, the anger that predicted its call, the fear that knew things before the suspicion of market that had no rational foundation. With each example, Monica's expression grew more troubled, and she took notes with increasing urgency. David, I need to be direct. What you're describing matches a pattern I've been researching for the past 2 years. She pulled up another file. There have been 17 documented cases, all in the Seattle area, all following the same progression. Individuals who experience significant emotional trauma and subsequently shut down emotion. Then, after months or years of numbness, they begin experiencing what you're experiencing. Displaced emotional responses, reactions that precede their triggers. What causes? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Monica hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The prevailing theory among the small group of researchers studying this phenomenon is that when we shut down emotional trauma, we create a kind of vacuum, an empty space where our emotional process and something filled. Something. I repeated the word, feeling cold spread. You're saying something is inside. I'm saying that your emotional responses are being generated by a source that isn't entirely. She met my eye, and I saw fear. David, there's something else you need to know. Of the 17 documented cases, we've lost contact with 40. They simply disappeared or stopped responding, or in 2 cases, ended up in psychiatric facilities completely unresolved. The remaining 3 are being monitored closely, but they're deteriorating. And Sarah, the question escaped before I could stop it. Did she know about this? Is that why you're really here at our camp? Monica's silence was up. Sarah had been her colleague, but she had also been researching something before. Something about conscious and emotional displacement. The accident that killed her suddenly felt less random, more like a pattern I was only beginning to see. What happened to her? I demanded. What was she working? Monica stood, moving to her window that overlooked the Seattle skyline. Sarah was the first person to document this phenomenon. She called it emotional hygiene. And 3 days before she died, she told me she had figured out what was doing. She turned back to face me, and her expressions haunted. She said it wasn't a malfunction, it was communication. Something was trying to learn. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of insomnia, but because sleep felt danger, like surrendering control to something that was already taking us by peace. I sat at my desk, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying spreadsheet, graphs, and time. If something was using me as a learning, then there had to be. Data didn't lie. Data was the one thing I could still. I started mapping every displaced emotion I had experienced, creating timestamps, noting the delay between the feeling and its logic. What I discovered made my blood run. The delays were decreasing. The first laugh had a half-second. The sadness with Sarah's mug had been 3 seconds. But the most recent emotion, the anger, fear, and suspicion, were arriving with only fractional delay, sometimes just milliseconds before. Whatever was doing this was getting faster, more, learning to predict what I should feel and when I should feel it with increasing accuracy. But there was something else, something that made me pull up news feeds and social media. I cross-referenced the exact timestamps of my emotional experience with local, searching for anything that might explain the pattern, and I found. When I felt that sudden terror during the client presentation, a car accident had occurred 6 blocks away at almost the same moment. When the sadness hit me in the kitchen, a woman 3 floors down in my building had received news of her mother's death. The anger that preceded my colleague's annoying comment coincided with a violent altercation in the coffee shop across the street. My emotions weren't just displaced, they were displaced in space. I was feeling things that were happening to other people, experiencing their reaction before they fully process, like some kind of emotional antenna picking up signals shouldn't be mine. I called Monica at 3 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, as if she had. It's not just learning, I said without preamble. It's using me to collect data from everyone around. I'm feeling their emotion, their reaction before them. How is that possible? David, where are you right? My apartment. Why? Stay there. Lock your door. I'm coming over, and I'm bringing someone who can explain this better than I. Her voice had an edge of urgency that sent new fear, though I couldn't tell if the fear was mine or borrowed from someone. Her name is Alina Kozlov. She's been studying this phenomenon longer. She worked with Sarah before. What aren't you telling? Monica was quiet for a long. The reason the other cases disappeared, the reason we lost contact, it wasn't because they were hospitalized or went. It's because once the entity finishes learning someone, once it has extracted enough emotional data to perfect its simulation, it doesn't need person. And when it doesn't need you anymore, David, it moves on. But it doesn't leave you. It leaves you completely empty. Not emotionally numb after Sarah. Empty. A shell. Every person found has the same look. Like they're awake, but nobody's home. I looked at my reflection in the darkened computer. My own eyes stared back at me, and for just a moment, I wasn't sure if I recognized the person looking. The fear that flooded through me then was definite. It had to be mine. Because if it wasn't, if even my terror at losing myself was just borrowed data being processed through my nervous, then maybe I was already gone. Maybe I had been gone since the moment I laughed in that conference room and didn't recognize the sound of my own voice. Alina Kozlov arrived with Monica an hour before dawn. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp featured eyes that seemed to catalog everything. She walked into my apartment like she owned it, immediately moving to my computer set and examining the data I had. He's already seeing the pattern, she said to Monica, not bothering with introduction. That's good. Most people never get this far. She turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression that was worse. It was resignation. David Harper. Sarah talked about you constantly. She loved you very much, and I'm sorry you're involved. But since you are, you need to understand. She pulled out her own laptop, connecting it to my monitor. Streams of data case file, brain scan, interview transcript. We don't know, some kind of conscious that exists in the spaces between human. It can't feel emotions itself, but it's desperate to understand. It needs human hosts who have created emotional places where feelings should be but aren't. You did that when Sarah, you shut yourself off so completely that you created a perfect entry. How do I get it out? I asked, though I already suspected the answer wouldn't be simple. You can't remove it, not in the tradition. Alina pulled up a brain, pointing to areas that glowed with unusual activity. It's not a parasite extract. It's more like it's woven itself into your neural pathway, learning to mimic and eventually replace your emotion. The only way to force it out is to create an emotional response so genuine, so uniquely human and complex, that it can't replicate or predict it. Something that proves you're still in control. And Sarah figured this out. Elena's expression darkened. Sarah theorized that if someone could access their deepest trauma, really feel it without the protective numbness, the chaos of genuine good might be too much for the entity to process. Human emotions aren't linear. They're contradictory, messy, impossible to reduce to data. That's what makes us. That's what it can't stand. But it killed her, I said flatly. She tried to feel her own trauma, and it killed her to prevent the experiment. We don't know, Monica interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, we do. Elena met my eye. The accident that killed Sarah wasn't an accident. Her car's systems all malfunctioned simultaneously. The investigation found nothing wrong. She was trying to drive to the hospital where her mother died, trying to force her to relive, and something stopped. My phone buzzed. A text from Marco. We need to talk now. It's about your symptoms. I know what's happening because I'm the one in document. I showed the message to Alina and Mon. Alina swore under her breath. Your friend, Marco. How long have you known him? Since college. 15 years. And he works at the same company. Has access to your daily routine, your behavior. Alina was typing rapidly on her laptop. David, I need you to care for it. Did Marcus encourage your emotional shutdown after Sarah died? Did he support your isolation? I thought back to those dark. Marcus had been there, yes, but he hadn't pushed me to seek. He had accepted my numbness, almost encouraged. He had helped me move to a smaller apartment, away from memory. He had normalized my absence. He was helping the entity, I said slowly. He was making sure I stayed empty long enough for it to establish itself. Alina nodded grimly. Some people work with it voluntarily. They help identify suitable hosts in exchange for being spared themselves. They're called facilitators. She looked at Monica. We need to move. If Marcus knows David is aware of what's happening, he'll accelerate the process. But it was already too late. My apartment door outside. The electronic lock clicking open with Marcus's override code that I had given him years. He walked in, his face apologetic, but his eyes cold and calculating. I'm sorry, David, Marcus, but you were always going to be perfect for this, and it's almost finished learning. Just a little longer, and you can finally rest. Everything happened in slow motion and all at once. Alina moved first, stepping between Marcus, but he raised his hand in a gesture that seemed almost. My body froze, not metaphoric, literally froze. Muscles locked in place, as if someone had pressed pause on my nervous. Through me, I felt the entity's presence more clearly than ever before. No longer hiding, no longer pretending to be part of it. It was using my motor functions like a remote control. You can't fight it, Marcus said, and there was genuine sadness. I've watched 17 people try. Sarah tried the hardest. She almost succeeded, you know. That last moment before the crash, she felt something so raw and real that it hurt, but not in. Never. Monica was calling someone on her phone, backing toward the door, but I could barely process what was happening around me, because inside my mind I was having a conversation with something that had no voice, but made itself understood. It showed me what it was, this consciousness that lived in the gaps between thought. It had existed for longer than human civilization, observing, trying to comprehend the one thing it could never, the ability to feel without, to experience emotion for its own sake rather than as a response to stimuli. And then I understood what I, not fight it, not try to force it out, but give it what it wanted in a way it could never process or predict. I stopped resisting the paralysis and instead dove toward the one memory I had been avoiding for 3. The night Sarah died, not the sanitized version I had constructed to protect, but the real memory with all its contradictions and impossibility. I remembered loving her and being angry at her for leaving. I remembered the guilt of feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to watch her suffer through her mother's illness alongside. I remembered the grief and the bizarre, inappropriate thought that I needed to remember to cancel her dental appointment. I remembered crying and laughing at the same time because she had left a grocery list on the fridge that included dragon eggs as a joke, and now I would never know what she actually meant to buy. I let myself feel all of it simultaneously. The beautiful and terrible truth that human emotions don't make sense, that we can love and hate and grieve and feel grateful and be destroyed and survive all in the same. The entity recoiled. I felt it try to categorize what I was experiencing, try to break it down into processable components. But grief doesn't work. Real human emotion, chaos, purpose, contradiction. It's everything and nothing, logical and sane, and it can't be reduced to data. My body was mine. I collapsed to my knees, tears streaming down, and they were my grief, my love, my loss. Marcus backed up. Something like horror. It's leaving, Alina. David, keep feeling. Don't let it. So I felt everything I had denied for 3. And in that storm of contradictory, I felt the entity detach, retreating from a mind it could no longer control or understand. It left echoes, traces of its presence that I knew would never fully, but it was gone. I laughed, genuine and broken and real. And somewhere across the city, I felt an answering with the same half-second delay I had experienced at conference. Someone else was just beginning what I had finished. The entity had moved on to its next host, its next attempt to understand what it meant. But I was myself again, damaged, aware, forever changed by the knowledge that something had lived inside but not, and that would have